The silverware clinked softly against the porcelain as waiters cleared away the appetizers. Laughter echoed from the head of the table, Marla's voice high and sharp, rising above the rest. I was 3 seats down, barely within earshot, but I heard it all. "She's just here to pay, don't worry," Caleb said, laughing as he leaned in toward Marla. She tilted her glass, then added, "And not wear anything too noticeable, right?" A few heads turned. No one laughed. I folded the check quietly and slipped it back into my purse. I had brought it to hand over tonight, the final payment for the venue, just under $75,000. The number had made my hands shake when I first wrote it. Now it felt weightless, meaningless. Across the table, Caleb stood to make a toast. He raised his glass, smiling at his future in-laws, thanking them for their support and guidance. He thanked the wedding planner, the band, even the sommelier. My name didn't leave his lips. I cut the roasted vegetables on my plate into smaller and smaller pieces until they were soft enough to swallow without chewing. No one seemed to notice I hadn't touched the wine I'd paid for. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. When dessert came, Marla leaned over and said, "You'll sit near the back right, so the photographer can focus on the couple." I smiled, small and practiced. The kind of smile you give when you're too tired to ask what someone really means. Afterward, as the others took photos beneath the fairy lights, I gathered my coat without a word. Caleb was laughing again, head thrown back, holding Marla around the waist, like he hadn't just dismissed me in front of 20 people. Back in the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my phone. I still had copies of every receipt, every contract, every email. And as I scrolled through the files I'd kept for bookkeeping, I found something else, something I'd nearly forgotten I included in the venue contract. 10 years ago, I buried the only man who ever made me feel seen. Paul wasn't flashy. He hated suits, preferred old boots, and couldn't boil water without burning it. But he was steady. When the steel mill collapsed, they found his body shielding 2 younger workers. That was his way. After the funeral, I went back to work the next Monday. Accounting isn't glamorous, but it gave me numbers I could control when nothing else felt certain. I kept Caleb in school, paid for every semester of law school without delay. I packed up Paul's tools, rented out the garage apartment, and made the mortgage disappear one check at a time. When Caleb passed the bar, I sat in the back of the auditorium with a camera I'd bought secondhand. He never saw me take the photo. I printed it, framed it, and put it by my bedside. It's still there. Over time, the requests came gently, small things. A loan for a new couch. Help covering the deposit when Marla wanted a bigger apartment. Then it became routine. Weekly transfers for groceries. Checks for furniture. Payments to a dog trainer named Ash with an unplaceable accent and a rate higher than my own mortgage ever was. I told myself I was helping them build something I no longer needed. I had my quiet kitchen, my worn-in chair, my coffee every morning at 6:00. No one came to visit, but I sent birthday cards and always called on Sundays. Marla rarely answered. Caleb did, but the calls were short. When they got engaged, Marla didn't ask if I'd help with the wedding. She emailed me a budget spreadsheet. No greeting, no thank you, just a breakdown of vendors and deposit deadlines. I paid them all. It wasn't until I opened the venue contract again that I remembered I hadn't just sent money. I had signed every agreement under my name, not Caleb's, not Marla's, mine. The planner had set out color-coded RSVP cards across the long table in the hotel conference room. I'd come early, as asked, thinking we'd go over seating charts or menus. Instead, I found myself staring at a small laminated sign in the corner labeled Sponsorship Tier Platinum. Beneath it, my name, not mother of the groom, not family, just financial sponsor. I picked it up, pretending to read the fine print, giving myself time to steady my breath. Oh, Marla wanted a modern feel, the planner chirped. She was young, all clipboard and white teeth. Less traditional titles, more curated energy. Curated, I repeated. She said it would keep the vibe consistent. You know, your style's a little off theme. She said it like she was complimenting me. I nodded just once. We finished the meeting quickly after that. That evening, I walked past the lounge on the way to my room. The walls were thin, and Caleb's voice carried through the open door. I mean, she probably shouldn't sit up front. It's not her moment, Marla answered. She'd just mess up the photos. And she'd never wear anything neutral. They laughed. Glasses clinked. I stood there until my fingers went cold around the keycard. Then I walked back to the elevator, each step heavier than the last. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, my coat still on, and stared at the framed photo of Caleb in his graduation gown. The one I'd taken from the bleacher's hands, shaking too much to focus properly. I'd kept it in my purse all weekend, thinking I'd give it to him before the ceremony. I'd even written a little note on the back, but now I wasn't sure he'd even remember the moment. I put it back in the drawer. Then I reached for the stack of vendor contracts again, flipping to the page I'd skimmed the night before. There it was. Paragraph 12.4. Event control rights, cancellation clause, refund window, authorization, Nadine Elwood. I've always kept my records clean. It's a habit that never left me even after retirement. That night, I spread the contracts across the small hotel desk like pieces of a puzzle venue catering photography wine. Every one of them listed under Elwood Financial Consulting, LLC. My LLC. A simple tax shelter I'd opened years ago now, serving a very different purpose. Marla's parents believed they'd paid half. They hadn't. Their share was a decorative gesture, a few deposits here and there, enough to feel involved. I'd covered the rest. Quietly, efficiently, as always. The numbers told a story they'd never read. I'd funded a wedding worth more than the house I raised Caleb in. The bar tab alone cost more than my annual income during the years I worked 2 jobs to keep him in school. But no one asked where the money came from. They just assumed it would be there because I always made sure it was. When the hotel Wi-Fi cut out, I switched to hotspot and opened my savings account summary. The numbers blinked back at me, smaller than before, but still enough. Enough for me to live on, enough for something else, if I decided to use it differently. The trust fund Caleb bragged about at family dinners didn't exist. I'd told that lie the day Marla asked if he could tap into it early. I wanted to buy time to keep them from draining what little security I had left. Caleb never asked why he hadn't seen the paperwork. He just believed what was convenient. I took a slow breath, reading the fine print again. Each contract included the same clause: primary party retains full authority to amend or cancel this agreement within 72 hours of event start date. My pen hovered over the folder for a long moment before I signed my initials beside each line. Then I gathered the papers, neatly slid them back into my bag, and turned off the lamp. By morning, I already knew which promise I'd break first. The pre-wedding brunch was held at a glass-walled bistro on the edge of the water. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a navy sheath dress I'd owned for years. It wasn't flashy, but it was pressed and clean. Appropriate. Or so I thought. The moment I stepped through the door, one of Marla's bridesmaids tilted her head, gave me a once-over, and asked, "Oh, are you with catering or housekeeping?" I smiled politely. "I'm the groom's mother." She blinked, muttered something that sounded like, "Oh," and turned away without apology. I waited for Caleb to step in to correct her, to laugh it off anything. He was standing nearby, a champagne flute in one hand, his other resting on Marla's back. He'd heard, but he didn't say a word. Just kept sipping. The table was long and full of noise, but no one left a seat open near me. I found a place at the end next to the planner's assistant, who was too busy organizing place cards to notice when I sat down. No one asked me to give a toast. No one even asked how I was doing. I watched Caleb raise a glass to Marla, call her the best decision I've ever made, and thank her parents for showing us what commitment looks like. My name never came up. After the plates were cleared, Marla walked over with a slim envelope and a neutral smile. "Hey, just a heads up, we moved your room. It's on the 6th floor now. Quieter, more comfortable." I opened the envelope. New key card. No explanation. The 6th floor was the service wing, no view. No complimentary anything, just industrial carpeting and a cart of linens parked outside my door. I stood inside that dim room for a long moment, then sat on the edge of the bed, key card in hand. I just reached into my purse, pulled out the folder I'd packed the night before, and opened my laptop. The venue contact was still starred in my inbox. So was the clause. So was the cancellation deadline. The hotel room was cold that night, or maybe I was. I hadn't slept since the brunch. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marla's voice, soft, polished fake, saying my room would be quieter. I lay awake until midnight, then gave up pretending to rest. The laptop screen lit the room in a thin blue glow. I opened the folder again, scrolling until I found the contract from the Charleston venue, the Willow Terrace Estate. Paragraph 12.4. I had underlined it days ago without knowing why. Cancellation permitted with 72 hours notice. 90% refund to primary account holder. I checked the calendar. The ceremony was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. It was Wednesday night, barely within range. The cursor blinked on a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed slowly, each word deliberate. To the management of the Willow Terrace Estate. Per the terms outlined in our agreement, I am exercising my right to cancel the event scheduled for Saturday at noon. Please confirm the refund to the original payment account on file. I sat back and read it 3 times. Then I opened my phone and scrolled through old messages until I found the one I'd kept Marla's text sent weeks earlier by mistake. I hope she keeps paying long enough to get through the honeymoon. I stared at it for a long moment, my chest tight but steady. Then I hit send on the email. The whoosh of the outgoing message sounded louder than it should have. One by one, I blocked their numbers. Caleb's, Marla's, even the planner's. The silence afterward was immediate, clean, like a room where the air finally clears. I closed the laptop, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. Tomorrow calls would start, panic would spread, and questions would pile up. But none of them would reach me. For the first time in years, I slept straight through until morning. By noon on Saturday, the venue was supposed to be filled with soft violin music, rows of white chairs, and carefully arranged floral arches. Instead, the iron gates remained closed, and the only sound was the growing shuffle of high heels on gravel. Guests gathered at the entrance, some shading their eyes, others whispering. A clipboard was zip-tied to the gate. The message was printed in plain black font. This event has been canceled by the primary financial party. For further inquiries, please contact the couple directly. There were no staff in sight. No catering vans. No quartet rehearsing in the corner. No welcome drinks. Just silence and confusion, thickening by the minute. Marla's makeup artist, visibly fuming, pulled out her phone and began recording. "Y'all, I showed up for this 6-hour glam, and there's nothing here. No one told me the wedding was off. Look locked. This is insane." By the time the first guests began calling Caleb, I was already 2 hours into the train ride north. The seats were worn but comfortable. My suitcase fit neatly under my legs. I watched towns roll past the window like scenery from someone else's life. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. The conductor walked through the aisle, announcing the next stop. I nodded, thanked him, and sipped the black coffee from the paper cup in my hand. It wasn't good, but it was hot. I liked the weight of it. Somewhere, Marla was screaming. I didn't need to hear it to know. I could picture her standing in front of the gates, voice high and strained, demanding someone explain how her $1 million wedding had vanished overnight. I leaned back against the headrest, let the vibrations of the train settle into my spine, and looked out at the bare trees moving past the glass. My name wasn't on the program. I hadn't been given a seat. But somehow I was the only one whose signature had ever truly mattered. By Monday, the internet had done what it always does, spread the story wider than anyone could contain. The video from Marla's makeup artist hit 200,000 views before the day was over. A luxury wedding disaster headline made it onto a gossip blog, and sponsors began to pull out one by one. A florist dropped her campaign. A skincare brand canceled a collab post. The venue, embarrassed by the exposure, filed for damages, naming Caleb and Marla jointly, along with a copy of the cancellation clause and the signer's name, mine. I saw it all, not because I looked, but because someone mailed me a printed copy of the article clipped from a magazine. No return address. Marla's parents were livid. They had sunk money and pride into a wedding that didn't happen, and they wanted answers. Caleb, cornered and unraveling, told them I had sabotaged the whole thing, that I'd gone rogue, that I'd planned it. But contracts don't lie, and neither do numbers. The receipts were clean, the dates aligned. Every transaction pointed back to one truth: nothing had been done in secret. He just hadn't paid attention. The hotel refunded most of my stay. I hadn't asked, but the manager must have known. The service wing hadn't felt like punishment anymore, not after the quiet I found in it. I stayed 2 more nights than I needed, walked by the water, and ate breakfast alone by the window. On the 3rd day, an email arrived. No greeting, just a subject line. Why would you do this to us? I didn't open it. There was no apology inside. I knew that without looking. No reckoning. Just shock that the person they thought was theirs to control had walked out the side door with every ounce of power. I closed the laptop, unplugged the charger, and slid everything into my bag. The cabin was small but clean, tucked between a birch grove and the edge of the lake. The porch creaked when I stepped out in the morning, and the water moved slow and steady, like it had nowhere to be. I liked that. I liked how nothing demanded anything from me here. I planted rosemary and mint in old clay pots left by the last tenant, brewed tea in the mornings and again in the evenings. I walked the trail behind the cabin once a day, not for exercise, but because I could. The silence wasn't heavy, it was mine. No one called. I didn't turn on notifications. The laptop stayed shut, except for bills and library books. The world could spin all it wanted. I was done chasing it. Sometimes I sat at the table by the window with pen and paper just to see what might come out. One letter I wrote began with, "You never needed my money. You needed to remember who taught you to stand upright." I folded it once, then again, and slipped it into the drawer. I didn't write Caleb's name on the envelope. I didn't need to. That letter wasn't for sending. Just for setting something down that I'd been carrying too long. The photo of him in the graduation gown stayed beside my bed, not out of sentiment, but because it reminded me of a different version of him, the boy who cried in my arms the night before his first job interview, who used to leave thank you notes on the kitchen counter in his crooked handwriting. Maybe he'd find his way back to that version. Maybe not, but I wouldn't be waiting. The lake stayed quiet as fall came in slow. I learned the names of birds I'd never bothered to notice before: chickadees, goldfinches. A heron that stood so still at dusk, I sometimes mistook it for driftwood. Each morning, I opened the windows and let the breeze in, light and cold and full of space. It was early spring when I walked into the bank for the last time. The teller recognized me, she always did, and smiled like she thought I was there to make a routine deposit. I returned the smile and handed over my ID. "I'd like to close an account," I said. She pulled it up on her screen, paused. "This one's linked to automatic transfers." Looks like it's been quiet the last few months, though. I nodded. That's why it's time. For years, that account had been a safety net for Caleb, not for me. Grocery money, rent, floats, surprise, overdraft fees. It had started as emergency support. Then it became expected. Eventually, unnoticed. She hesitated, polite. Would you like to leave a note on the file in case the recipient tries to access it? I thought about it for a moment. Then I asked for a pen. On the digital pad, I wrote one word: closed. She read it, then nodded once and finalized the process. All set, she said. Would you like a printed confirmation? No need. Outside, the sky was clear, pale blue with just a whisper of breeze. I didn't rush. I walked the long way home past the bookstore with the crooked sign and the diner that always smelled like burnt toast. No one knew where I was. There were no texts waiting, no emergencies pressing in. The weight I'd carried, the quiet, invisible kind, was gone now. Not because someone else took it, because I finally chose to put it down. I turned onto the gravel road that led to the lake. The water was still glass-like, catching the light in long silver ribbons. At the cabin, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. I watched the steam curl up into the quiet kitchen. When the whistle blew, I poured the tea, sat by the open window, and let the breeze move through me like an answer I didn't need to ask for. There were no calls to return, no debts to track, nothing left waiting.